1. Disfluencies, hesitation fillers. Natural speech includes pauses filled with sounds. Examples, er, usage. Well, the main issue was finding common ground. Multi-turn example, host speaker. So what was the immediate trigger for this? Expert speaker. It seems like the attack was the final straw, you know.
Mm-hmm.
2, fillers, discourse markers, words or phrases used to structure speech, manage flow, or signal attitude, often without adding significant meaning. Examples like, right, okay, actually, basically, usage. So basically, they agreed to talk, one-on-one. Multi-turn example, expert speaker. The agreement, well, it covered several key areas. Host speaker. Right, okay, like what specifically? 3, sentence fragmentation. Speakers often use incomplete sentences or phrases. Usage. Big implications, definitely. So the lossy, that was formalized then. Multi-turn example, host speaker, and the timing. Right after the treaty suspension, expert speaker. Exactly, seems like direct retaliation. 4, repetitions and rephrasing. Speakers might repeat words or rephrase thoughts mid-sentence. Usage. It was a really pivotal moment. They aimed to normalize things. Multi-turn example, expert speaker. The key was bilateralism, just keeping it between them.
Yeah.
Host speaker, keeping it bilateral. Got it. 5, interruptions and overlapping speech. Conversations often involve speakers starting before the other finishes, especially for agreement, disagreement, or quick questions, simulated by rapid turn-taking in the script. Multi-turn example, host speaker. So India essentially returned. Expert speaker, a huge amount of territory, yes. Over 13,000 square kilometers, a major gesture. Host speaker, wow, okay, that's significant. 6, contractions and colloquialisms. Use common contractions, and some informal language appropriate for a podcast setting, not overly slangy. Usage, it wasn't exactly a smooth ride, but that's a big deal. Multi-turn example. Host speaker. Didn't everyone agree back then? Expert speaker? No, not at all. There was definite pushback, especially from the Yansang. 7, hedging. Using words or phrases to soften statements or express uncertainty. Examples. Sort of, kind of, perhaps, maybe it seemed, potentially. Usage. It was perhaps a way to de-escalate things. This could potentially lead to more friction. Multi-turn example. Expert speaker. The suspension's impact, legally speaking, might be sort of limited. Host speaker. So maybe more symbolic than practical, in a legal sense. 8, question tags. Adding short questions at the end of statements to seek confirmation or engage the listener. Examples. Isn't it right? Wasn't it?
Yeah.
Usage. That was the main goal, wasn't it? Multi-turn example, host speaker. This bilateral thing was India's main focus, right? Expert speaker, absolutely. That's been their consistent line. 9, pauses, implied. While not written explicitly, the short turns in structure imply natural pauses in the flow of conversation. The TTS system will handle the actual timing. 9, pauses, implied. English notes.
Okay, let's dive in. April 24th, 2025. A date that maybe didn't make huge waves everywhere, but it was pretty significant for India-Pakistan relations.
Right. That was the day Pakistan announced it was suspending the 1972 Simla Agreement.
Exactly. An agreement that goes way back, signed after the 71 war, wasn't it? By Indira Gandhi and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto.
That's the one. The whole idea was to, try and build some sort of peace, normalize things between India and Pakistan after the war that led to Bangladesh's creation.
Yeah, and this didn't just happen out of the blue, did it? I mean, just before that, April 22nd, we had that horrific Pahalgam terror attack, 26 civilians killed.
A terrible event.
Yeah.
And then the very next day, April 23rd, India suspended the Indus Waters Treaty.
So Pakistan suspending the Simla Agreement on the 24th, it feels very much like a tit-for-tat, a direct response.
It certainly looks that way, which really brings us to the heart of what we want to unpack today. Why is this 50-plus-year-old agreement suddenly making headlines?
And more importantly, what does its suspension actually mean for the region? For stability, for diplomacy.
Absolutely. And for those of you listening, especially if you're preparing for the UPSC exams, understanding this is pretty crucial.
Right. This connects directly to India-Pakistan relations, South Asian diplomacy, stuff that's important for both mains and prelims.
Definitely. Getting the history and the current implications sorted out is key.
And just a quick historical tidbit before we go deeper. The Simla Agreement wasn't universally loved back in 72 either, was it?
No, not at all. The Jansang, the precursor to the BJP, was strongly against it.
I remember reading Atal Bihari Vajpayee actually protested in Shimla at the time. Felt India gave away too much.
That's right. So there was controversy from the very beginning. Adds another layer, doesn't it?
It really does. Okay, so let's rewind. How did this agreement even come about? What was the immediate background?
Well, it all goes back to the 1971 Indo-Pakistani War. That conflict was triggered by Pakistan's military crackdown in what was then East Pakistan, trying to suppress the Bangladesh liberation movement.
Which led to a massive refugee crisis in India.
Yeah.
Millions fleeing across the border.
Exactly. India eventually intervened, supporting the Mukti Bahini, the Bengali resistance forces. The war was, well, decisive. India won quite quickly.
And resulted in the surrender of around 93,000 Pakistani soldiers, right? A huge number.
A huge number, yes. It was a major military and political defeat for Pakistan. They were in a significantly weakened position afterwards.
So that must have set the stage for the negotiations in Shimla, a very specific context.
Definitely. The talks happened at Barnes Court in Shimla, now the Raj Bhavan, and by all accounts, they were pretty intense.
I can imagine. What were the main sticking points? Kashmir, presumably?
Kashmir was, unsurprisingly, a major one. India was pushing hard for all issues, including Kashmir, to be resolved bilaterally, just between India and Pakistan.
Whereas Pakistan probably wanted to keep international options open, like the UN.
Precisely. Pakistan preferred involving third parties or international forums. So that was a fundamental disagreement right there.
How did they bridge that gap then? Seems like a non-starter.
It seems a lot came down to the personal diplomacy between Indira Gandhi and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. They had direct talks, trying to find a way forward.
So face-to-face negotiation made the difference.
Apparently so. They managed to agree on a framework that focused on, let's say, peaceful coexistence and step-by-step normalization, even if they couldn't solve the Kashmir issue definitively right then and there.
Interesting. So, okay, they reached an agreement. What were the actual nuts and bolts, the key provisions?
Right, let's break down the core elements. First, and perhaps most importantly for India, was the commitment to bilateral resolution of disputes.
That point you just mentioned.
Exactly. Both sides agreed to settle all their differences, explicitly including Kashmir, peacefully and only through bilateral negotiations. No third parties. No UN.
That's been India's line ever since, hasn't it?
Absolutely. It became a cornerstone of India's foreign policy towards Pakistan.
Okay, so bilateral talks. What else?
Second, the establishment of the line of control, the laws.
Ah, right. Formalizing the ceasefire line from December 71.
Yes. The agreement basically said the ceasefire line as it stood on December 17th, 1971, would be respected by both sides as the line of control in Jammu and Kashmir. And crucially, they agreed not to try and change it unilaterally, regardless of their different legal views on the border itself.
So kind of a practical measure to stabilize things on the ground, even if the underlying claims didn't change.
Exactly that. A de facto boundary to manage a very volatile situation.
Makes sense. What was the third point?
Third was respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity. Pretty standard stuff, you might say, but important to state.
Meaning?
Pledging to respect each other's independence, borders, political systems, and importantly, refraining from interfering in each other's internal affairs.
So no supporting insurgencies or blasting hostile propaganda at each other.
Yeah, it was the idea, yes, to try and foster a less antagonistic relationship.
Okay. And what about military actions?
That's the fourth key provision. Non-use of force. Both agreed to refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of the other. This aligned with the UN Charter principles, obviously.
A direct attempt to de-escalate military tensions seems vital after a major war.
Absolutely.
Okay, so bilateralism, low street, respecting sovereignty, no force. What about actually, rebuilding connections?
Right. The fifth part dealt with the normalization of relations. This outlined steps like resuming communications posts, telegraph, sea, land, air links.
Practical things.
Yes. And resuming travel facilities, promoting trade and economic cooperation, encouraging cultural and scientific exchanges, basically try and get things back to some semblance of normal interaction.
And it also covered the prisoners of war, didn't it? The 93,000.
Yes, a very important humanitarian aspect. The agreement facilitated the repatriation of POWs and also civilian internees on both sides.
That must have been a huge relief for many families.
Undoubtedly. And a sixth point, while maybe not an explicit numbered provision, was that the agreement essentially paved the way for Pakistan to eventually recognize Bangladesh.
Ah, so it wasn't in the text, but it was a direct consequence.
It created the necessary diplomatic space for that to happen later, resolving a major outstanding issue from the 71 war.
Got it. Anything else notable in the agreement?
Well, it did mention future meetings between the heads of government to keep the dialogue going. And as a pretty significant gesture of goodwill, India agreed to return the territories it had captured in West Pakistan during the war.
Which was quite a lot of land, wasn't it?
Over 13,000 square kilometers, a substantial return.
Okay, so on paper, it looks like a solid framework, but how has it actually played out over the last, what, 50-odd years? How relevant has it been?
Well, its relevance has waxed and waned, you could say, but it's definitely been a central reference point. Let's look at the impacts. First, as we said, bilateralism. India has consistently used Simla to insist that talks with Pakistan, especially on Kashmir, must be bilateral.
Using it as a shield against international pressure or mediation attempts.
Pretty much. India's view is that external involvement just complicates things. So Simla has been the go-to argument for that.
But has it actually worked in resolving anything, given the state of relations often?
That's the big question, isn't it? Progress on core issues, especially Kashmir, has been minimal. But the agreement did achieve something else: the stabilization of the loco.
Even with all the ceasefire violations we hear about.
Even with those, yes. For decades, the loco has largely held as the de facto line. It's gained a certain, maybe pragmatic, international recognition through sheer practice over time. That status isn't easily erased, even now.
Okay, so the loco became a relatively stable, if tense, reality. What other impacts?
We shouldn't forget the humanitarian and diplomatic achievements early on. Repatriating those tens of thousands of POWs was huge, and enabling Bangladesh's recognition helped settle the post-war landscape. It did facilitate de-escalation back then.
True, those were concrete outcomes, but clearly normalization didn't fully happen. What stopped it?
The challenges to implementation, they've been immense. Deep, deep mistrust on both sides, for starters.
And the issue of cross-border terrorism.
A constant and major obstacle. India has consistently accused Pakistan of supporting militant groups acting against India, which obviously violates the spirit, if not the letter, of non-interference and non-use of force.
And the different views on Kashmir never went away.
Never. That fundamental disagreement has always simmered beneath the surface. And then you have events like the Kargil War in 1999.
A clear violation, surely. Pakistan crossing the Law Sea.
Absolutely. And the Siachen conflict starting in '84 both demonstrated how fragile the agreement could be when push came to shove.
So its principles were often ignored in practice. How have more recent events affected its standing?
In the contemporary context, new factors came into play. Both countries becoming nuclear powers in 1998 obviously raised the stakes dramatically.
Changed the whole strategic calculation.
Completely. Then, more recently, India's 2019 decision to abrogate Article 370 in Jammu and Kashmir. That significantly altered the status quo and further strained relations. Pakistan reacted very strongly.
Which brings us back to the present. Pakistan suspending the agreement in April 2025. What are the immediate effects? We heard about border closures, too.
Yes, the suspension announcement was reportedly accompanied by actions like closing the Wala border crossing, halting trade, restricting airspace use. These point to a significant escalation.
So what does the suspension itself mean? Is it just symbolic?
It certainly got a large symbolic and diplomatic impact. You could argue the agreement was already pretty dormant in practical terms, given the freeze in dialogue after events like the Pulwama attack in 2019.
So maybe formalizing what was already happening.
Partly, yes. But it also signals a potential strategic shift by Pakistan. It could be interpreted as them formally abandoning the bilateral framework for Kashmir and intending to push much harder for international intervention, UN, China, or OIC, whoever might listen.
A definite move away from the Simla principle. What about the loss? Does this suspension put its status in question?
That's a major concern. If Pakistan no longer formally recognizes the agreement that established the Law C, does it mean they no longer accept the Law C itself, even as a de facto line?
Which could mean?
Potentially an increased risk of ceasefire violations, maybe even attempts to alter the line. We saw what happened in Kargil. However,
Yes.
there are counterweights. The Law C, as we said, has decades of international recognition behind it, and India's military preparedness along the line is very high. So while risks might increase, it doesn't automatically mean the Law C collapses.
Increased risk, but maybe not immediate chaos. What about the wider picture, regional stability?
Well, it certainly doesn't help regional stability. Anything that increases tension between two nuclear-armed neighbors is worrying. It pushes any chance of meaningful dialogue further away.
And the economic side, border closures, trade suspension.
That's likely to hit Pakistan harder, frankly, given its current economic challenges. It risks further isolation. India, meanwhile, might use the suspension diplomatically to paint Pakistan as an unreliable partner, unwilling to stick to agreements.
Interesting. What about the legal angle? Can a country just suspend a treaty like this?
From a legal and international law perspective, it's complicated. The Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties governs these things. Usually you need grounds like a material breach by the other party or a fundamental change in circumstances.
Does Pakistan claim either of those?
They might argue India's actions, like the Article 370 move or the Indus Waters Treaty suspension, constitute such grounds, but many clauses in Simla are sort of best endeavor clauses, not strict legal obligations.
And the lock-sees status.
Legally, the LOC's status as a de facto reality accepted for 50 years is probably quite entrenched in customary practice, regardless of the treaty's suspension. So Pakistan might not gain much legal ground internationally by this move. It could even backfire if it's seen as reneging on commitments.
So paradoxically, this could actually give India an advantage.
You could argue that it might offer India certain strategic advantages. With Simla suspended by Pakistan, India might feel less diplomatically constrained.
How so?
Well, perhaps freer to take a harder line on cross-border terrorism responses, maybe less bound by the bilateral-only framing if Pakistan itself has abandoned it. It could potentially allow India to more assertively pursue its claims on Pakistan-occupied Kashmir or intensify diplomatic isolation efforts.
So India might say, you suspended the agreement that called for bilateral talks, so why should we limit ourselves now?
That could be part of the thinking, yes. India might also reevaluate other bilateral arrangements. Visas trade purely through a national security lens now.
This really highlights the core problems, doesn't it? The challenges and future prospects seem pretty grim.
It underscores why Simla, despite its intentions, never fulfilled its potential. The deep mistrust, the domestic politics in both countries, external factors like Pakistan's relationship with China, they all played a role.
And the agreement itself maybe wasn't perfect. No strong enforcement mechanism.
Exactly. No robust dispute resolution mechanism.
Yeah.
And the fundamentally opposing views on Kashmir were papered over, not resolved, meaning tensions could always flare up.
So where do things go from here?
Yeah.
Is dialogue even possible?
Reviving any meaningful dialogue would need serious confidence-building steps first. Strict adherence to the ceasefire, genuine cooperation against terrorism. Frankly, given the current climate, that seems very unlikely in the near term.
A difficult situation. So, wrapping up, the Simla Agreement was this major post-war attempt to reset things.
Right. Aiming for bilateralism, stabilizing the lossy, peaceful coexistence, but plagued by mistrust and violations throughout its history.
And this 2025 suspension by Pakistan marks a pretty definitive moment, signaling, perhaps, the end of its practical relevance, even if it was a diplomatic touchstone for decades.
Precisely. The repercussions, while maybe initially symbolic, definitely have the potential to increase tensions and force some strategic rethinking, especially on India's part.
And that point you made earlier, that this could even be seen as a strategic misstep by Pakistan.
It's a possible interpretation, yes. It might give India more diplomatic room to maneuver, justify stronger responses, or rally international opinion against Pakistan's actions.
It's all a sobering reminder, really, of how fragile peace can be in South Asia and how hard it is to overcome historical baggage.
Indeed. The Simla Agreement's story is a lesson in those challenges.
And for you, our listeners, especially those preparing for the UPSC exams, grasping the history of agreements like Simla, their provisions, why they succeeded or failed, and the implications of recent events like this suspension, it's all vital context.
Absolutely. This touches on key areas for your mains IR, diplomacy, and prelims, covering significant agreements and historical events.
The information we've based this discussion on comes primarily from reports in the Eurasian Times, so you might want to check that out for more detail.
Good source for following these developments.
So if you found this deep dive useful, please do hit that like button, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and definitely leave a comment below. Let us know if you have questions or if there are other topics you'd like us to explore.
We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for tuning in.